In early 18th century France, something happened that would fundamentally alter how humanity understands the nature of wealth. For a brief, intoxicating moment, an entire nation felt and acted as if it was suddenly, unimaginably wealthy. It did not happen through years of careful industry or the slow accumulation of gold. It happened at once. In the narrow, winding streets of Paris, citizens of every rank, from the lowly shoeblack to the highest duke, crowded around the Rue Quincampoix. They carried paper notes that they believed represented a new era of fortune. The air in the cafes was thick with the same frantic energy, talk of shares, of the Mississippi, of a future where money grew as easily as weeds in a garden. Men who had spent their lives in crushing debt walked with their heads held high, certain that their poverty was a thing of the past. To the common person, the rising prices were not a warning sign, they were the heartbeat of progress. It felt as though France had discovered the philosopher's stone of economics. But beneath the glamour, the structure was brittle. This wealth was not anchored in the soil of the colonies or the bullion in the vaults. It was anchored in one volatile element, trust. And trust, while the most powerful engine of human cooperation, is also the most dangerous. Because once that faith fractures, the entire architecture of the system doesn't just sag, it evaporates. To understand the crash, one must understand the despair that preceded it. France, under the weight of the late Sun King's wars, was a nation in a straitjacket. The monarchy was drowning in debt, and the old ways of finance were failing. In that era, money was literal. It was gold, it was silver, and it was finite. If the king needed to pay his armies or build his palaces, he had to physically possess the metal. When the coins ran out, the nation's growth stalled. The economy was like a heart struggling to pump blood through clogged arteries. The intellectual and political elite were desperate. They were looking for a miracle, or at least a way to bypass the stubborn limits of physical metal. They needed a new way to move value, and they were willing to listen to anyone who promised a way out. Enter John Law, a Scottish gambler, a convicted murderer, and, most importantly, a mathematical genius. Law argued that money was not a commodity, it was a medium. He posited that the wealth of a nation wasn't measured by the gold locked in its coffers, but by the velocity of trade in its markets. If you could issue paper that the public believed was as good as gold, you could effectively print prosperity. He persuaded the French Regency to implement his two-pronged system. 1. The Banque Royale, a central bank that issued paper banknotes in place of metal coins. 2. The Mississippi Company, a massive, monopolistic venture meant to extract the vast, theoretical riches of the Louisiana Territory in the Americas. It was an audacious bet, link the currency of France to the potential profits of a wilderness thousands of miles away. The French government, intoxicated by the promise of easy growth, handed the keys to the kingdom to the Scotsman. At first, the experiment worked. Paper money was introduced into circulation, and the initial reaction was one of hesitant curiosity. For centuries, a Frenchman knew that if he bid a coin and it dented, it was real. Paper, by contrast, felt ephemeral. However, the convenience was undeniable. Trade flourished. Merchants could move large sums without the burden of heavy chests of silver. The economy, finally freed from the scarcity of metal, began to hum with activity. Then came the Mississippi Company shares. Law made it possible to buy these shares using his new banknotes. Suddenly, the money was being used to buy the dream of wealth, which in turn made the paper money seem even more valuable. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a perfect loop of perceived value. By late 1719, the hysteria on the Rue Quincampoix had reached a fever pitch. The street became the world's first high-frequency trading floor. It was no longer about the actual trade of spices or furs from Louisiana. It was about the ticker. People abandoned their jobs. A humpbacked man famously made a fortune by renting out his own back as a makeshift desk for traders to sign their contracts. People who had never seen a stock certificate were mortgaging their family estates to buy in. They weren't investing, they were chasing the horizon. The frenzy was infectious. Even those who were initially skeptical eventually felt the pang of fear of missing out. They invested not because they understood the Mississippi Company, but because they saw their neighbors getting rich. At the peak of the mania, Paris became a city of delirium. The social order was inverted. Former servants drove carriages, and aristocrats were seen begging for scraps of information about share prices. This is the psychological event horizon. When an entire society shifts from analysis to momentum, the system ceases to be economic and becomes a cult. When participation is driven by a fear of being left behind, the price of the asset loses all connection to its underlying reality. It is no longer a stock, it is a talisman of social status. At this stage, the system is no longer investing. It is a collective hallucination. The end began with a few quiet, logical whispers. Some of the shrewdest investors, noticing that the dividends from the Mississippi Company were not matching the astronomical share prices, began to quietly sell. They wanted to lock in their gains by converting their paper back into gold or land. In a normal market, this is a healthy correction. In a market built on a shared hallucination, it is a poison pill. As the big players left, the illusion began to crack. The confidence that held the currency at par with gold began to falter. When behavior changes, when the crowd stops buying and starts looking for the exit, the momentum that drove the bubble upward begins to act as a vacuum in reverse. The crash was not a slow decline. It was a violent, structural failure. When the public realized that there was not enough gold to back the mountains of paper notes, a literal riot ensued. In the streets, people were crushed in the rush to the bank to redeem their paper. The government, terrified, tried to force the value of the stock down to dampen the speculation, but the move backfired spectacularly. The belief evaporated in weeks. What was worth a fortune on Monday was practically worthless by Friday. The wealth that had transformed Paris into a city of millionaires vanished, leaving behind a nation of broken, vengeful people. John Law, once the most powerful man in France, was forced to flee, wandering Europe as a gambler until his death. The French government was left with a mountainous debt and a populace that had learned a brutal lesson about the fragility of promises. Trust in paper was destroyed for a generation. It would take decades for the French to feel comfortable with the idea of a central bank again. The trauma of the Mississippi bubble became a national scar, a reminder of the dangers of separating value from reality. The Mississippi bubble is a mirror for every era. It was not a glitch in the 18th century. It was a manifestation of the human condition. Whenever we see an asset, be it tulip bulbs, dot-com stocks, or digital currencies, skyrocket based on pure sentiment, we are looking at the Rue Quincampoix. We are looking at a system where belief has outpaced understanding.